Okay, great. My name is Tuan Pham. I work at Cambridge University Library. There I have a bit of a dual head. One is head of the development team, but also I'm directing our digital transformation program, part of which has a fairly big program in terms of our collection management and digital preservation. Today I'm chairing the session for the DPC. As part of the DPC, I am on the executive board, so I've kind of volunteered to help out at the DPC for this session. We have about an hour and a half. Stuart will present, Stuart Forrest from Dell, and then Stuart is encouraging interaction, so if you have questions, please do interrupt and ask. However, please wait for the microphone before you talk, because we are also broadcasting the session. The microphone does not have an on-off switch. You just bring it close to your mouth and talk. Please wait for that. I think that's the only logistics we have.
Okay.
Other than that,
that's cool.
Welcome, Stuart. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. Wonderful to welcome you to Glasgow. Certainly nice to be up here when the sun's out. John, thanks for organising that. As Tuan said, my name is Stuart Forrest. I work with Dell Technologies. The session today is a tutorial to explore how we mitigate risk and build resilience in the age of ransomware. So there's been quite a few sessions this morning. Unfortunately, I missed out on them around the catastrophic data loss, but they certainly sound very interesting. There's a lot of themes that will resonate through that with what we talk about today. So myself, my role, I'll explain this to John before, we're talking about how do you describe to your kids or your grandma what you do. And I've changed mine recently just to make it dead easy. So my role is to help businesses protect against and recover from ransomware. And you go, oh, that sounds pretty cool. Or my kids go, what does that mean, Dad? But anyway, yeah. So through the session, what we're going to do, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the kind of the threat landscape. Some of you will be aware of the geopolitical position that we're in at the moment and some of the stuff that's going on in the wider world. So we'll look at that. We'll look at how cyber threats have evolved. I get really passionate and excited about what I do. So sometimes I have to grip the desk, and I've got multiple drinks ready because I know I'm just going to go off one in a minute. But what I'm going to do, which is I'm really interested in talking to you about and taking you through, is I'll take you through kind of some of the outputs from a report. So you might have heard of the Health Service Ireland, the Irish equivalent of the NHS. So they had a ransomware cyber attack in May. It actually started in March last year, but they had an event last year. PricewaterhouseCoopers have written an independent report which has gone back to them, and that was published it was published a couple of months ago, but I got access to it last week. So it is really interesting in terms of where you think they might be as an organisation, and it will probably resonate with you guys in terms of where you are on an IT journey and legacy systems and networks and infrastructure and all that kind of thing. But how they cope with it, the lessons that they learn, and then some of the strategies going forward. So that I'm looking forward to talking to you about. Also talk about key considerations in terms of reducing the impact of a cyber attack, and then from a Dell perspective, what we class as the steps to build cyber resilience. John will be assisting, so if there are questions, feel free. He's my little brother really, with a bigger beard. But if there are any questions, just pop your hand up and he'll come over with the microphone. So how do we build confidence, digital trust and cyber resilience? It's obviously required for employees, for students or for customers to feel safe in sharing information and engaging in kind of business and social activities, and taking a proactive approach to secure and protect data as part of that cyber resilience plan will be critical to building both that learner, the student, customer and employee trust. There's a number of things that you need to consider as we go, as you go through that kind of journey. I know Tuan's just mentioned he's on a digital transformation, so I might pick on him a little bit as well to talk about his experience. But these are some of the kind of assets that you need to consider when building that kind of capability and resilience. So in terms of cyber threats, they are becoming more sophisticated. I think as an organisation, Dell have been talking about cyber and cyber recovery since 2015. So for us, it's not something new. And the language that we use has very much changed. So we used to say, if there is a cyber attack, this is what you do. If there is a cyber event, this is what you do. It's now a case of when there is a cyber attack, this is what you do, because they are so prevalent. Recent attacks have cost, the examples are up there, but they cost billions in lost revenue. They can leave ongoing negative effects like a damaged reputation, lack of shareholder confidence, or negative reviews and loss of customers and this kind of thing. I did say we'll talk about the health service in Ireland. So I think in May 21 there was a string of ransomware attacks. Colonial Pipeline was quite a big one that you will have seen that impacted the availability of oil supplies across North America, or the Eastern Seaboard even. I think JBS was another one that was a meat packing producer, so they were impacted later in the year. Yes, these are bricks and mortar type businesses, not necessarily institutions like some of you guys are from, but the relevance is the same. So going back to the session this morning on catastrophic data loss, how do we recover from that and what do we do? So the world is changing. That threat is more real now, or even more tangible than it was 18 months prior, and hitting closer to home. So things that have changed, or certainly that we're seeing, a cyber attack used to be about coming in and encrypting data. So it would come in, it would pick a critical application. They typically sit in your network for 200 days unnoticed. They're looking at the interdependencies between applications, between servers, between networks, between directories, and it's north and south. It's east and west traffic and north and south. So they're looking at everything to see where's the best, most valuable place for us to hit. As a data protection guy, we focus on backups of critical systems, Active Directories and things like that. What we're seeing is that attackers are now targeting them, so they know that if you have backups, they encrypt your applications, your workloads, your databases. They're going to come in and take the backups out because they know you can't recover, or you're more likely to pay the ransomware, or the ransom rather. So there's been a big shift. As I say, it's moving away from encryption. The thing that we're seeing at the moment, which is pretty terrifying, is just deletion of data. So they're not bothered about encrypting it, they're not bothered about the ransom, and certainly some of these nation-state attacks that we're seeing more recently are just about absolute destruction. There's been, again, in kind of Russia and the Ukraine, there's been targets between those two. So yes, there's a ground warfare thing going on, but there's also this cyber warfare thing going on where they're attacking mobile networks, they're destroying satellite networks, they're destroying communication networks, and that's that. I can feel my heart beating, pounding out my jumper, thinking about what that means. So yeah, it is big business. They are increasing in kind of frequency and severity. But don't be afraid, it's all right. Don't have nightmares. It's not the end of the world yet. So it is worth talking about what this business looks like. John and I were talking before about examples of these 14-year-old kids in a bedroom in Arkansas that the FBI are smashing down the front doors. They're coming in with machine guns because these guys have done a denial of service attack on somebody's servers. And at the time, the kids probably thought it was okay. And in your head, you probably got this perception that actually that's where cyber attacks come from, but it's not. They're actually set up as businesses now. They have R&D teams. They have people that are scouring LinkedIn for contacts. They have people that are looking for email addresses. It is more of a business. I think what the Wall Street Journal says that cybercrime is more the office than the matrix. And it's a huge industry supported by this, this massive advanced ecosystem. There's buyers, there's sellers, there's support staff, there's money launderers. Like I said, they're not detonating malware from a basement. It's the cogs in a sprawling network of services that support those who launch the attacks. So the next bit blows my mind, but it's the highest ROI crime. It's a multi-billion-dollar business. And because it's autonomous, there's very little consequences to the people that are going through and that are carrying out these attacks. So, as you know, the results can be pretty devastating. I think this was a big surprise, but the figures basically, it's no surprise that cybercrime is expected to cost the world $10.5 trillion by 2025. It's more profitable than the illegal drug trade. You're less likely to get caught. But where it puts it in terms of the world economies, in terms of scale, that's how big this problem is. going back to the war in Russia and the Ukraine and the stuff that's been going on in the Middle East for the last 40 years, that's a traditional war. This kind of cybercrime and nation-state attacks, that is the new war. That's what we need to be prepared for and prepared against. But yeah, the scale of it, just think about that for a second. It's just bonkers. Pretty scary, yeah. It's pretty scary. The good news, I did say there was good news and don't have nightmares. In the UK, we are supported by what we call the NCSC, the National Cyber Security Centre. As part of GCHQ, they constantly issue kind of edicts to business, to critical national infrastructure providers, to organisations, to us as individuals. Their goal is to make the internet a safe place, which is pretty grand when you think how big the internet is, but that's where that's what they've set up or set out to do. The great things that they do as the NCSC is give us as individuals a framework and as organisations a framework to kind of prepare for and be ready for attacks. One of the things that I'll talk about is this cyber resilience strategy. I think Samaya nearly talked about it before. People, process and technology, they are the three most important things that you have when you're building this cyber resilience strategy. This toolkit that the NCSC have, if you haven't seen it and you're not involved in it yet, it's free to download. There are tests that you can run. This will allow you to go to different parts of the organisation to say, what do we do if? What would you do if? There are exercises to go through to help you collate and create run books and processes and documents to help you recover when that happens. If you can't contact someone like Dell, who can send teams of people in to do it. So I'd recommend that you have a look at the NCSC. And as an individual with elderly relatives or young relatives or blasé relatives, I'd recommend that you visit the NCSC just to get advice around simple things like passwords. Don't use your date of birth, don't use your name, just simple things like that. So they go from the bottom all the way up to the top in terms of complexity. I'm sure the US have got something very similar, but we'll just focus on the UK for a moment. I say resilience is a strategy. So I guess this is to kind of help provide context around where a cyber recovery solution will fit into that overall security and cyber resilience strategy. So we start with a standard definition. It's using the NIST security framework. So we talk about identify and protect. So this is the activity before an attack. We detect and respond during an attack, and respond is clearly what we do after. So you'll know in your organisation, you've got multiple layers of protection tools, of security endpoints, of antivirus software. The strategy kind of brings all of these things together. Resilience means the ability to prepare for and to adapt to changing conditions and withstand and recover rapidly from disruption. So we were talking before about an organisation that were attempting to recover from tape, or they had some dual factor authentication that they're trying to do with two guys at different times with different keys, and they deleted the wrong drive. So in that kind of situation, you want to be able to recover quickly. You need to be able to to provide a service back as quickly as possible. So that resilience, it includes the ability to withstand and recover from deliberate attacks, from accidents like we talked about, or from naturally occurring threats or incidents. And in the digital world, with its reliance on data and real-time access on any device from any location, it is more and more difficult to be resilient based upon kind of non-technology capabilities. So we can't just rely on the people. There are other things that we need to factor in. So in short, and I said it before, it's a strategy that incorporates people, process and technology into this holistic framework that protects an entire business, an organisation or an entity. Any questions while I take a breath? Cool. I'll take a quick drink as well. After 2 years of being Zoomed, to actually stand up in front of a room of people, there was a couple of great things that iPres did. So on the website they had FAQs. One of the questions that I loved was, what's the weather like in Glasgow? I thought, that's ace. Question 2, what should I wear? I thought, that's even better, because I've got no idea. Am I wearing a suit? Am I okay just coming as myself, or what is this? And then actually seeing people in real life is even more, it's brilliant. So thank you. I digress, as I do quite a lot. So, excuse me, I say it's a strategy. It involves people, process and technology. Those 5 pillars there, we'll come back to that a little bit later in the presentation when we talk about what the NIST framework is. Some of you might have heard of it anyway. It's an American framework that basically helps businesses understand what they need to do where and when. But the exciting bit that I'm going to take you through, I mentioned this before, it's based on there's no one here from the health service for Ireland, is there? No, he nearly put his arm up then. Well, that's good. Okay, good. Right, so we can be good. So the information, as I said, it's from an independent post-incident report. It's written by PricewaterhouseCoopers. It was presented back to them in December 21. It basically takes, what I'll do is I'll take you through the scale of, their network, their infrastructure, what it looked like, the challenges that attack kind of presented, the timeline, some of the assessments that they ran, some of the findings from investigations, and in short, so I said before, don't have nightmares. This is like your worst nightmare times 100. The more that I go through it and the more that I read it, it's a 180-page report. The good news is I haven't got 180 slides, I've only got 10. But I'll share with one of the team after, and you can have a look at it. While it is about the health service in Ireland, it will be very relevant and very real as I go through it to you and your organisations and where you are in terms of IT maturity, cyber maturity, and that kind of thing. So just to help you understand the scale, so I'm going to have to look on there because my eyes are terrible. So an IT team of 350, over 70,000 devices, 130,000 staff, 4,000 locations, 54 acute hospitals, and over 1,000 applications. So it's not small, but equally it's not massive. It's probably about the size of some of the universities that are kind of in the room and some of the organisations that are in the room. So just to help give you some context of how big it is or how big they are. In terms of what they call the NHN, the National Healthcare Network. So it's primarily, I don't know how many of you are overly IT. Okay, cool. Right, I'll try and make it work. It's primarily a flat network. So that means it makes it easier for staff to access the IT applications that they need. So there's not multiple different access points. It's kind of open for all. So the good news about that design is it's open for all and you can get access to it. The bad news about that design is it's open for all and you can get access to it. So if someone, if someone can access it, that exposes the risk to the Health Service Ireland for cyber attacks, but also to other organisations that are connected to it. So we've seen cyber attacks. You might have heard of Maersk Shipping. So they have thousands of shipping, or hundreds of thousands of containers on thousands of, tankers floating around the world. They had a cyber attack, took the whole thing offline, with the exception of one site which was in Nigeria, and it was off the network, ironically. They had to go back to this site in Nigeria to restore the whole business. They lost about 6 or 7 months. They had no idea what container was on what ship and who was where doing what, with the exception of this little piece in Nigeria. But the ransomware attack was effected from an accountancy firm that was in their supply chain in the Ukraine. So a Russian company attacked a company in the Ukraine with a phishing email. That link got into their network and Maersk was out. So that kind of network that these guys have, it's a complex IT environment. There's legacy systems, there's new systems. At the time of the incident, just under 2/3 of the server estate were described as modern. The remaining estate deemed end of life, and they were operating on extended support or out of support. Now, I would imagine 80% of the people in this room, and the organisations in this room, would probably go, yeah, we're a bit like that. We try and get, we bleed it. We'll get as much money out of it as we can. We don't need to reinvest, and we'll extend that support, and we'll do what we do. And it just creates massive risk. So, somebody can get into that network. This is what happened. They can get outside of that network as well and impact that supply chain, which is, devastating. So, in addition to those legacy systems, the IT estate that was out of support or on extended support, they had over 30,000 Windows 7 workstations that were deemed end of life by the vendor. So they weren't in a great place, but again, even for me in my kind of day-to-day role, this is pretty common that we see. Not everybody's at the front, not everybody's got all the patching, not everybody's got everything done. There are gaps in it. So they had a cyber security assessment which rated their maturity as low, and the examples of the reason behind that was they didn't have a CISO or a security operations centre established. So I don't know if that's something. A quick show of hands, who has a CISO Okay, cool. Who has a security operation or SOC centre? Okay, cool, same people. Excellent. That's good. So at the end of the session, those that haven't, talk to those that have, and we'll work out what we need to do to get to the promised land. This is a timeline from the Conti attack, which happened in 21. It was during COVID. What's really interesting, as I said before, is just how massively unprepared they were for this attack, not only from an infrastructure perspective, but in terms of the people and the processes to recover. I've said it 3 times now, I'll probably say it 4 times more. Cyber resilience is a collection of people, process and technology, and if you don't have all of those things, you're not quite dead in the water, but you've got a lot of work to do. I was reading this again this morning, thinking it's not a high-level assessment, it's a damning assassination of their cyber security capabilities. So anything in red is a risk, anything that's not red is not so bad. This was, I guess, as part of the report, the colour code by risk rating at the time of the attack. I don't know if you can read this. Can you read it? Right, so I'll explain to you. So reduce your surfaces. So there's things that you do as part of a resilience strategy. Reduce your surface attacks, so prevent internet-facing weaknesses. So you might have a firewall, or you might have a VPN that you connect into. These guys didn't have any of that stuff. They didn't have vulnerability scanning. They didn't have multi-factor authentication for email or for remote access accounts. They didn't have an application that would prevent the execution of an untrusted Microsoft Office executable. They didn't have controls in place to monitor the usage of administrator privileges and administrator accounts. Some of these things from mine and John's kind of experience is what we would class as quite basic, but this is a health service with a mature IT infrastructure, and you'd think, well, they've got that stuff. I think they probably thought, oh, we've got that stuff as well, until this happened. So, there's a number of different things, as I say, reduce your surface attack, reduce the threat of phishing. Going back to the people thing, one of the things that Dell is huge on is education of us as individuals. I'm sure NatWest are the same, in making sure you go through, you know what a phishing email looks like. So I would hope, I'll do a quick show of hands. Who doesn't know what a phishing email looks like? Excellent. So you've all done the training. So, if it doesn't look right, then it's probably not right. And if that email address doesn't look right, then it's probably not right. So there's things like that, educating people, reducing the attacker's dwell time. So I mentioned before, an attacker sits in an environment typically on average for 200 days. So they're monitoring traffic east and west, north and south, they're looking at everything. There are tools out there that HSE have got that will monitor that and that will tell you if there is activity that is slightly suspicious, if there is someone there that shouldn't be there, if there's something going on and it just wasn't turned on. Limit the blast radius of unauthorised access. So if someone comes in, how do we restrict what they've got access to? How do we limit where they can go? How do we segment our networks and our infrastructure? They didn't do that. I've got 10 slides, but I'm going to end up doing the same thing all the way through it. They didn't do it. They just didn't do it. They saw all the signs were there, all the tools were there. They didn't use them. They didn't accept any of it. They didn't acknowledge any of it. But the last point goes back to the slide, pillar 5 of the NIST framework in preparing to respond and to recover, and massively at risk for that. The report kind of takes you through, well, I'm going to take you through the outputs of that. I'm guessing I'll just put this down and walk over there. I've not done proper high-tech presentations before, so I'm not sure about microphones. Right. As I say, every step of this report, and I know it's in hindsight, and it's a report based on what happened, but there's just loads of red flags. There was lots of opportunity, plenty of notice. They were slow to respond and kind of missed opportunities. So the attack originated from a phishing email, an Excel attachment that somebody received in March 21, 18th of March. They opened that Excel document that was attached to that email. From there, the attackers basically got to work. So they've basically abused a significant number of highly privileged system admin accounts, moved across the network to multiple hospitals. So I said before, it's an open network to make it easy for people to get to stuff. That means because someone's in there, they can get to stuff and get all the way around it. The tools and the techniques that were employed by the attackers at the time include basic and obvious malicious PowerShell commands, which are well known to be used by ransomware groups. The antivirus tool, as I say, endpoint security, it did record detections of it, but they weren't identified and they weren't investigated by the health and safety, by the HSE. They just carried on because it was just a report. They didn't actually identify it until after their cyber security solutions provider flagged it on the 12th of May and the 13th of May, which is 2 months after the initial attack. And obviously at that point, that third-party service, the critical incident response service, was not invoked. So despite the alerts being there for a tool that's commonly used by a ransomware group, Cobalt Strike it was, and it being across multiple servers, they didn't react. They didn't do anything to it. Didn't invoke a cybersecurity incident, didn't escalate, didn't identify the severity of it, didn't investigate it or contain it. Part of this was down to, again, we talked about, I was chatting before about this, with a lack of kind of cybersecurity expertise. So what do we do? How do we understand the significance of it? And what's the significance of these detections and how do we act on it? They didn't do that. There was an absence of cyber response governance and the process to kind of help people through that, response to cyber incidents. What's interesting is that another hospital in the group notified they basically notified the CIO that their network had been compromised, and they suspected that there was something malicious going on, there was some malicious activity going on, and it was originating from the HSE's network. The HSE performed an IT-centric investigation that incorrectly concluded that the HSE was under threat from the hospital and not the other way around. It was a bit of a comedy of errors. So following that, they still didn't seek the help of any external cyber incident response firms or the NCSC to investigate or provide any guidance on, how they should deal with these and respond to these detections. What is interesting, the Department of Health and one hospital acted on the alerts that they'd received and these detections of suspicious activity. They brought in a third-party incident response service, and they kind of quickly deployed endpoint protection and detection and response tools that basically prevented the ransomware from executing on their network, including kind of critical data and critical servers. So it's just interesting to see how having if we flag something up to our central team and we've got a response and we know what the process is, we can do something about it. But if we do it individually, the first thing is the pointing fingers at each other saying it's not my network, it's yours. Doesn't help. But I say there's a lot of things going through this that there's just red flags everywhere. So making sure you've got all of that stuff aligned is going to help when it comes. So another bit that's interesting, when the nightmare gets real. So early on, they kind of recognised that they need help, they need specialist skills, and they brought in third parties for the kind of incident response, legal teams, forensic support to help understand the scale of it. Because of the impact of it and the national scale of it, they kind of encouraged goodwill from third-party support and vendors. There was a lot of pro bono work. They created this kind of good cadence and a hub where people could get together, daily stand-ups, major incident meetings, and this kind of program governance. But what they were doing as they were going through this process was basically creating, backfilling the process. So what do we need to do when this happens, and getting it documented. They brought the Defence Forces in. I think it was 18 or 20 days after the attack. They kind of contacted Garda and brought military level cyber support in. So they lost a hell of a lot of time. They lost, no response plans, no playbooks to understand how to bring back applications, no tools kind of capable of investigating and remediating, no established or prioritised list of applications and systems for recovery. So, if we get attacked, what's the most important thing that we've got? From, a banking perspective, it's your banking licence. So if you're unable to kind of let people get access to their funds to use their cards or make payments and transactions, that's the most important thing that you've got. Active Directory obviously enables people to access the network and the applications, but it's thinking about that we don't do. We just assume that it's there when it's not. So because they didn't have any of this stuff, they were in all sorts of trouble. They lost a lot of time, they lost clinical services, and again, that kind of interdependencies of applications and what do things need to lean on didn't have it. The other thing they didn't have was kind of communication. So phone system's gone down, how are we going to communicate with each other? Well, we haven't got anything set up in the past because it's never happened before, we've never needed to do it. So I say that you know, a lot of inefficiencies because of that, the lack of information, a lack of centralised information, a lack of asset information, a lack of even contact details for people that ran applications. So we need to bring this application back. Who owns it? Again, I'll pick on Samaya. We were chatting about this before. There's a catastrophic data loss. How do we get that application back? Well, I don't know, because John used to run it and he left 3 years ago and we haven't got the detail in the book and we don't know what patching version, and you just go, oh my God. On top of that, there's a massive reliance on 2 or 3 guys in the IT team. And those 2 or 3 guys have got to do they've got to do their job as well as recover all of this stuff and work out how to do it. So it caused massive bottlenecks and delays. They couldn't, just trying to get stuff done was just really difficult. Probably, it obviously impacted on the time that it took for them to get back and the speed of recovery. But it's just, reading it, you just go, these are like Janet and John, really simple steps, really simple things that we should be able to, we should have in place and we should be able to do. So they also work closely. I mentioned this incident response provider that they work with. So they worked really closely with them. And this is where I feel like I'm going to go crime watch. They started talking about, they capture the evidence of the unauthorised access and what they've done, so they can see where the people came in, they see how long they're in the system, they see what they've been able to affect and kind of access. And this is just some of the highlights from it. As I say, it feels like describing a burglary when you talk about it. So they were able to see what data was exposed to the attacker, then what was exfiltrated out of the environment to a file sharing website. The attacker provided some samples of data in chat rooms, which they accessed via a link in the ransomware note. They found that some data was published on the dark web. The Financial Times published redacted extracts of the data, which they then shared with the health service to say, I think you might have a problem. We've got this data. Luckily, it was assessed and they kind of figured that actually it was of low risk to the individuals and to the rights and freedoms of the individuals. So luckily, they didn't have a GDPR issue on their hands as well as a cyber attack. But you can see from that just the scale of the issue outside of just network and system capability, the knock-on effect of where that data goes and what these people are doing with it, and how much access they can get, into your systems and networks. It is pretty scary. The good news, how they recovered. So 2,800 servers, 3,500 workstations, 15 domains, all with evidence of encryption. So some of them were restored from backups, so they were kind of excluded from that account. But still, it's a significant total out of, a total network of 4,500 servers and thousands of end-user devices and applications. Exchange was encrypted, so they had no access to email. They had started to move people into 365 and move it offline. And if they completed that or been online before the attack, then the impact would have been minimal because they would have been air-gapped and they would have been off the network and, someone else's responsibility. As I said before, that kind of lack of containment, so the ability to, if they had containment in place, they would have restricted the attacker and what they were able to see, where they were able to go, and that, would have increased or decreased the impact on, on organisations within it. So the other bit, again, going back to the conversation before, online backups were encrypted in places, secondary backups were tape, but the tape backups are only made periodically. So, in my world, I typically see people will do a daily, a weekly, a monthly, and an annual. The monthly or the annual might go to tape. That tape might go to Iron Mountain, or it might go CEO's boot, or it might go. I had an example of a guy in Greece. He used to put them in his glove box in his car in a plastic bag. And you go, right, these are, this is critical business material that has to be protected in a contained and, preserved environment, not in your glove box. How are you going to recover that? Anyway, I digress. So, yeah, they found that they had a massive problem in terms of recovering it because of, how it was backed up and how it was protected. They said that without the decryption key, recovery from backups, obviously it takes time and resources. You need to bring that data back somewhere. You need the people to support you to do it. And that would have been, a significant amount of equipment to deliver at scale what they needed to do. Again, this lack of preparation for a widespread IT event. We talked about that before. So Maya, again, I keep picking on you, how we don't have the time to test. So we do something once and we go, yeah, that works, and then we're off and we're on to the next thing. Because they didn't have the preparation of a kind of a widespread IT event, it created bottlenecks and prevented them being able to work on the highest priority tasks because they didn't know where to start. They didn't know what was real and what wasn't real. It's just massive inefficiencies in terms of that recovery. So getting back to the good news, after 1 month, they had decrypted 47% of servers and applications, 64% of the business applications were back up and running. After 3 months, 100% of the servers were decrypted, and around 95% of applications were back up and running. The bit that makes me chuckle is the last line. So over 20,000 IT tickets were raised between July and September on email alone. So in the period from the start of the attack to the end of December, there are 38,000 help desk tickets that were raised on the IT team who were trying to do their job with problems relating to email that was encrypted in the attack. So you just, the scale of that. Hi. Yes.
Question. You said they managed to decrypt most of their environment. How did they do that? Did they get a hold of the key used for encryption?
So some of the encryption was at a very basic level.
Okay.
And the people that they brought in the incident support teams were able to decrypt it. There was a suggestion that they had bought the decryption key, but it's not listed in the report. So I think it was base level. When they said that the tools that the attackers were using were so blatant, like, hi, I'm here, we're here, and we're doing stuff, and it was quite a low level kind of maturity attack. So they were able to get it back, and that's probably why they were able to get it back quite quickly as well. But yeah, 38,000 help desk tickets for email. Imagine coming into that off your holidays. Yeah. So what have they done since the attack? Some of the steps that they've taken. Obviously, the focus since it has been on implementing the recommendations from third parties, including kind of continuing to recover systems. Obviously, resolved the 38,000 help desk tickets. But some of them, again, when that kind of thing happens, and reading the report, you think actually that's a sensible thing to do. We'll extend the kind of the contract with the incident support or incident response provider. Will increase that to 24/7 monitoring. The most crucial response or defence that they've got against further ransomware attacks is that incident response provider, and that gives them that kind of valuable safety net that, given the inherent weakness of their cyber security controls across the estate, they need that. They need that in there. All of the improvements are kind of critically important to make sure that any alerts of malicious activity, so they missed the ones that they had before from their alerting tools that they paid money for, they're now in a position that any of those can be acted on. A transformation plan, cyber security transformation plan, that will sustainably reduce the cyber risk in the long term. It will give them a framework to help achieve it. It will redesign how they manage and maintain cyber risk within that kind of extensive technology network and estate. Like I said, they've still got a lot of legacy IT that needs to be modernised, and a key bit around the kind of artefacts. So I said before, as they were going through the process of recovery and getting back, they were creating the process to recover. So that also adds confusion because people, somebody's left the business or they don't know how this application works, they don't know the interdependencies. But now that they've got those processes created and the communication structures and tracking dashboards, that'll be invaluable, in the event of kind of future attacks. So it's critical that that's obviously collated and managed centrally. So that's how they have responded to it. Again, just some more recommendations. I asked the question before about who has CISOs, who has SOCs, and kind of where are we in terms of maturity. Recommendations were appointing a senior level leader responsible for cyber security, for governance around the improvements, the tools that they're using, and the response strategies. They created or appointed a program lead to drive the execution of that transformation campaign, program even. The board committee is now involved and interested in what they're doing rather than how much money they're spending. It's, what are we actually spending it on, and are we on track? Are we on, are we on this plan? It's going to take them 2 to 4 years to get to, a reasonable level of kind of core capabilities, but that's what they're looking to do. Mention it again. I did say the 4th time, but it might be the 6th time now. So people, process, and tooling or technology. You know, from a people perspective, bring in subject matter experts. Hi.
You mentioned a couple times there money. Did the report have a bottom line cost?
It was redacted. It was redacted.
Is there any way to get hold of that figure?
I would imagine if you Google hard enough, you'd be able to find it. It will be in a newspaper somewhere. It was just all of the, like, there's some really interesting stuff in there, but all the really interesting stuff was redacted. So you get to the point you go, oh. Next page. Oh.
Did they do anything in terms of trying to calculate the mitigation costs as well that they put in place?
Again, these are the redacted figures. So all of the interesting stuff, the really interesting stuff, is redacted because it's in the report that was independently produced for them. Obviously they will have looked at, you know, appointments lost, the kind of the time between patients being able to be seen, and, you know, there will be numbers that associate to that. Just that unfortunately they didn't give me access.
You can send a phishing email.
I can send a phishing email. I'll share that. I will share the report with Swan, and it's publicly available anyway. I see Rob's got a question at the back.
Well, it's actually more about a good question.
Okay.
The cost of the ransomware attack, according to an Irish newspapers, was around about 100 billion
Yeah.
Oh, move back into that.
To the health service. Amazing. Yeah. So there's obviously a significant change. Well, let's go back. We'll go back to the point I was finishing there. So about the people. I said I was going through it. They clearly didn't have the security capabilities to respond or to react to it. So by bringing people in with that SME, subject matter experts, they're trained to identify, detect, and respond to threats. The process, I talked about them building that up, this playbook, and this is a conversation I have pretty much every day, probably 2 or 3 times a day with people around. Excuse me. What do we put in, you know, our recovery vault? That's one of the things that we sell. But what do we do? And the process is it's creating the playbook, so the step-by-step actions or response actions, as well as being able to report on it. So, you know, somebody left the business 3 years ago, don't know how that application works. Actually, each application should have a, you know, step-by-step guide to restoring it. Active Directory the same. You know, all of these things are critical in just day-to-day operations. Never mind, you know, what you guys specialise in. Everything needs to be kind of mapped and documented. From the tools, obviously, you know, a deployment from endpoint detection to protection right to the boundary, and then bringing in things like a SOC, the Security Operations Centre, to help them kind of centrally manage the tools and have a better view of that, you know, that very flat network that we talked about at the beginning. In coming to closing up on this this section around this attack, there's some considerations for a cybersecurity transformation program. So the things that you need to think about, and you know, at a high level, basically all the things that we just talked about for the last 20 minutes. But IT foundations, security foundations, access management. So who can access what systems, multi-factor authentication, data security. You know, implementing proactive and detective measures to secure critical data. Again, talking about applications that we've got that can help us. Network security, network segmentation, threat detection and response, attack surface protection, end user security, and security culture. It's really involved. You know, there are point solutions, and there are organisations that will give you a point solution. They'll give you antivirus, or they'll give you endpoint protection, or they'll give you backup protection, or they'll give you, you know, all of these things. But actually, unless you've considered all of these different things and got all of that in place, it's not worth the money. You have to plan and have the process and have the, you know, the understanding from the people. I mentioned at the start the NCSC and what they do with their toolkits and about preparing organisations. You know, when we talked about the IT team being the bottleneck because it's on them to do everything. You know, when you think about what's going to happen and you have to, you know, educate peers or, you know, board members around what's going to happen, it is a massive undertaking and a massive exercise. It's not something that John in IT can do or Jane in IT can do. You know, it's something that everybody has to be involved in. It's quite a big undertaking. So, like I say, happy to share, and will share a report, the link to the report. I did find it interesting, even the redacted bits. And again, it's there's multiple layers that you can put in place to protect you when you're when your critical assets are at the very heart of it. So I'm going to move on now, a bit more upbeat and light-hearted, and talk about Dell and our view in terms of resilience and recovery. So we understand that cyber resilience is it's a strategy, it's a combination of things. It's not just a technology. I'll talk about what we have from a cyber recovery solution perspective. Like I say, cyber recovery distinguishes itself from traditional backups and disaster recovery in several ways. So it provides additional layers of physical and logical security at both the solution and the system, and a data or file level to ensure basically that critical data can be preserved with integrity, confidentiality, and then you're able to recover it when you need it. And cyber recovery from our perspective, from a Dell perspective, is focused on protecting critical data from cyber threats and away from the attack surface. So we're not talking about things at the endpoint. We're talking about, it'll tell you in a minute, but things like Active Directories, things like server configurations, things like network configuration. The absolute, everything has gone. How do we start again? That's what we talk about as the starting point, and that's what we put in in our isolated environment, when and if necessary. What's been interesting, I was telling John about this before, so I've been with Dell for 6 years. For 6 of those years, I've been talking about cyber recovery. I've changed the way that I describe what I do because it's easier for people to understand. And you kind of go, I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. Am I drinking the Kool-Aid? I'm just like fully Dell, we're amazing, we do all this stuff and it's really great. But then you go, actually, we've got this external, assurance or affirmation that we are doing the right thing. And it's not just me trying to sell something. It is us trying to, help businesses recover and be part of that. So when we look at kind of worldwide security guidance, Gartner, the Sheltered Harbour, I can't read that one because my eyesight's terrible. The cyber security and infrastructure part, American organisations, the Hong Kong Monetary Fund, they all talk about the things that we talk about. So having isolated environments where your data is protected, where it's off grid, it's off the network, and it's clean. So if something does happen, I am able to recover it reliably because one of the examples, I missed it out actually. One of the examples from the HSE, as they're going through that process of recovery, someone thought that they'd run, they'd basically set this application, this workload up in a clean, safe environment. So they decided to connect it back to the internet, but they hadn't done all of the testing because there was a mismatch in communication, and they basically exposed themselves to the risk again, even though they've just spent 2 months cleaning everything, because this guy thought it was all right. They plugged it in, and you can't do that. So this external affirmation that actually what we are doing as Dell Technologies is a good thing and is the right thing and is kind of supported and endorsed by the likes of the White House, by Sheltered Harbour from a financial perspective, by the National Cyber Security Centre in the UK. It's quite reassuring for me. So going back to this kind of the traditional approach. DR, most people have got that in place. Disaster recovery, typically replication. I said before, when somebody breaks into your environment, they're typically there for 200 days on average. The good news is if you've got a DR site and this site goes down, we can get it from here. The bad news is if you get something in here that's not good, it's replicated over here. So when that goes, and you're in trouble. Data encryption, obviously encrypting data at rest, in flight, and doing what you can is all good. But from a recovery perspective, it's sometimes not enough. A tape backup, again, we talk about the reason that businesses can kind of sustain and exist or get through these cyber events is the speed to recover. So if you're using tapes to back up, I think we're on LTO 8 or 9 now, and there are people who have records that might be on LTO 2, 3 or 4. So if you're running, to go back to the point about testing it, if you're running LTO 2, 3 or 4 backup or archive, and you need to recover data from that. Have you actually got an LTO234 machine? Have you actually run a test to make sure that that tape is even recoverable? And have you got the backup catalogue that tells you what's even on that tape? Do you want to just go and get 100,000 tapes out of there that are going to take 12 hours per tape to restore what we think might be roughly in April from 1947? No, I don't think so. And the other point around cyber insurance. So a lot of organisations that I talk to say, we're good. We've got all these things in place and we've got cyber insurance. And you go, well, that's cool. You know that Lloyd's of London just announced probably 2 weeks ago that if your cyber attack is from a nation state, they're not going to pay out. They're not going to help you. And you go, oh, my insurance has just doubled this year and it's not worth anything. So yeah, these traditional approaches, they're not enough. Again, going back to the steps to build it, executive level awareness, education. I talked about the NCSC and that toolkit that they've got to help you have those conversations. Agile risk management, so developing practical and effective risk management programs, using a risk-based approach, protecting your assets and making sure you have got the most critical data in the safest possible place. Ultimately, nowhere is safe, but if you have taken all the steps in the mitigation that you can to protect it, then good work. Align the processes, again looking at HSE, left hand, welcome, meet right hand. If you can align your processes before you get to this point, then that's clearly a good thing. And test and retest. I know we don't always have time for that, but it is critical that you do it. I mentioned before the NIST cybersecurity framework. Has anybody seen this before? Not the presentation, just this slide. You've seen it? Cool. So NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. This is their cybersecurity framework. It basically provides a policy framework of computer security guidance for how private sector organisations in the US can assess and improve their ability to prevent, detect and respond to cyber attacks. It's a 5-pillar thing, as I said. You can do certain things in it before the attack, so we can identify and protect. We can do things during the attack, so we can detect and respond. Where my area of expertise within Dell sits is afterwards and the response and recovery and what we focus on. We have a solution that we call the Cyber Vault. I mentioned that we started doing it in 2015. Our first kind of big Cyber Vault was with Sony Pictures. You may have heard of that that attack where they'd made a film about a dictator that wasn't received particularly well by said dictator, and he got some of his people to go and delete their whole back catalogue of films. So that was our first real big step into helping a business recover from that kind of scale of cyber attack, but also then creating an infrastructure that would protect it against that happening in the future. In simple terms, because we're in Scotland and they have castles, the vault is at the top of the castle, the top of the turret, where the staircase sweeps up to the right, so you can't get your sword out because the staircase is going this way. You can't swing it round, and it's where you keep your most critical assets. So they are absolutely safe from attack. There is a little bit of technology that I'll talk about and what it looks like. So it basically uses backup data. Again, we talked about at the start how that backup data is increasingly the target. So if you've got backups, we're going to come and encrypt it, we're going to come and delete it. If you don't have that data, you don't have the backups, you can't restore. What we do that's a bit different is the kind of, we have forensic analytics of the data that is held within it. So we are looking at not just a metadata level, we're looking at the contents of the file. So has there been any anomalies, is there any changes since it was presented yesterday? We don't keep months and months worth of data in that vault, we'll keep 7 days, because that is the most current that we can go back to. And it also means you don't need petabytes of area to do that. There's a landing zone where once we've taken these backups and we know that they're clean, there's a landing zone where we can kind of rebuild or recreate those backups to make sure it is, we're double checking that it's clean. And then there's a clean room for us to restore the applications before you bring it back into a clean environment. The concept is basically a cyber vault. It is off the network. So we mentioned the air gap. So when I talked about the HSE and we said they've got this flat network where you get into it, you can see everything. Our cyber vault sits outside of that network and it goes in to connect. So if somebody's sat in the network and they're monitoring the traffic, they're not going to see something coming in, but they'll see something going out and they see that connectivity. So because we sit on the outside and pull the data, we're invisible to people that are even sat inside, which is pretty cool. Like I say, we've been delivering it since delivering cyber recovery vaults, it continues to evolve. The software that we provide as part of the forensics and the analytics continues to evolve, and I've no doubt it will continue to do that. We've got over 3,000 of these vaults globally, and that's everything from, you know, high street banks, multinational global organisations, to, you know, emergency services, the military, health. We've got a number of installations with the NHS in the UK, and education, pretty much everything in between. In addition to that, and again chatting with Rob and colleagues from Dell before, and the other bit I get excited about, when I drink the Kool-Aid, when I talk about Dell and what we can do, so there's point solutions that you can buy from other organisations. Dell will come in and help you when it hits the fan and everything goes. We have teams of people that will come in, they will help you rebuild the whole infrastructure. They obviously provide the infrastructure, and they'll provide all of that support and that service, so we can do the whole thing from end to end, which, you know, other vendors don't do. What I didn't want to do was turn it into an infomercial, and, you know, the guys are around, Rob, John, and Greg. We are around for the next couple of days, so if you would like to have further conversations with us, we're at the CDW stand downstairs. Thank you very much for your time and your attention this afternoon. Hopefully that's been at a reasonable enough level that everyone's cool with it, and if anyone has any questions, I'm open to questions. John.
Yeah, thank you for all that. And early on in your deck, you had a very red slide from that assessment of the that particular incident before.
Yeah.
It seemed an interesting framework, a good framework. There was some nice headings across the top, and there were some nice questions being asked, and they'd all been coloured in orange or red. Is that a standard framework, or was that used just by the people?
That's actually, it's PwC's, that's their framework.
Right.
And it kind of aligns to the NIST framework anyway, so you think about sense, detect, respond, and recover. I can share it.
Yes, it just looked interesting. It's a great sort of quick review of something, just to do a bit of colouring and see if there's anything that's, that's missing.
Definitely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Cheers. Any other questions?
This is probably more of an observation than a question.
Okay.
You've done a brilliant job of presenting all the risks and solutions around ransomware attacks in particular, and cybersecurity in general. Can you put your last slide up with your cyber vault?
Yes.
This is a digital preservation conference.
Yes.
Everybody in the room is about digital preservation. I think there's a lot more synergy, horrible word I know, but it's the right word, between the concepts that you are discussing in and around the protection of information from cyber attack.
Yeah.
There's a huge synergy with the kinds of protections and infrastructure that digital preservationists need to underpin their systems. They might not use the same words as you do.
Yeah.
Okay? They might not talk about vault storage. They might not talk about a clean room and a data landing zone. But the idea that you reach out from the archive into something to pull stuff in rather than having things pushed to you, so that you're in control of what lands on your deck and you don't get infected.
Yeah.
The idea that you are you're making sure you've got offline copies, so that in the worst case scenario you lose all your infrastructure, you've got something to go back to.
Yeah.
I know that certain infrastructure, in the way that the National Archives builds its preservation system, they can build out their preservation system because they use a scripted deployment approach that enables them to rebuild their entire platform if they lose their platform. In principle, I believe, even if they no longer have access to the hardware, because they could stand it conceivably up in a virtualized environment. So there are a number of underpinning concepts that you're talking about here that really align with the digital preservation community. recently in our organisation, we have had 1 or 2 security incidents. Everybody has them.
Yeah.
I'm not going to describe them.
You're among
because
friends, it's all right.
I'm not going to describe them because they're not my incidents to describe, and it would be inappropriate. However, one of them at least involved observing there was a presence of malware in some archived material that we were holding.
Okay.
And we discovered a couple of things. Firstly, we discovered that classic malware detection systems don't always successfully get inside some of the container formats that are made use of in digital archiving, digital preservation. So you can be carrying risk inside your collection without knowing it.
Yeah.
That's a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
But the thing we have learned is that our cyber team really like digital preservation
Okay.
because it gives them a chance to dig inside some interesting formats and stuff in their sandbox and fix problems. Okay. And they love that. That's their favourite space, right? Yeah. And they've been kind enough to build us a little application, which we can now use to dig inside some of our content that we'd have never been able to do before.
That's pretty cool.
So there's a real synergy. So for other preservationists here, make best friends with your cyber team. Yeah. Okay?
Thanks.
It used to be said, make friends with your IT team. Forget the IT team. Get alongside the cyber team. Because the way they think about your data is the same way that you think about your data. The IT team think about the business. Yeah. The cyber team think about the bits, the bytes, and who's hacked them. Yeah. Which is the way you think about your data.
Brilliant. Thank you. It's a great point. It's a great point. Rob, you've probably seen examples of that as well, the kind of the synergy between. So, like I say, from my side, from a protection perspective, we talk about the critical materials, and you know, for organisations, it's where the revenue comes from, the workloads that they've got. Rob's involved from a archive.
I was going to say to your point here.
Yeah, hang on.
Hi there. So often we think about digital preservation as I'm looking at my hardware and the features that it brings to look after the data. But you can't look after the data if it's going to be subject to a cyber attack. So the synergy is fantastic. Whether you look at the NIST framework or whatever, you talked about a system. My system includes how do I handle cyber resilience. My math could be wrong, but if it's every 9 seconds that there's a cyber attack, then probably if there's 100 people here, one of your organizations has been attacked during this presentation. If we're looking at digital preservation, it's about assets over many years probably, not, So the tools and the techniques and the thinking that we need to bring to that is multidisciplinary, and it is about bringing together subject matter experts from digital preservation, IT team, but your CISO or your cyber security people have never been more important. And I think, we didn't want to make this a sales pitch today, but it's really about patterns. Yeah, there are design patterns that Stuart's brought up that you, as people who are interested in preserving your data, can look after. And I think the biggest challenge that we have is that people see more and more value in data. We keep talking about, the scale of data that we store. So the challenges in moving to a vault become even more difficult. So the design patterns, that's the IP that business like Dell and our peers bring. But I think it's great to be participating at a conference like this because it's about how do you bring this together systematically to preserve data. Yeah. We'll continue talking about this and now.
You've got me going now.
Yeah. Well, we have to, the event got extended by an extra 30 minutes today, so this is perfect.
Sorry if I go.
So you're absolutely right about design patterns. For colleagues here who can't, with the best respects, employ Dell and these other experts on their design patterns, go to the NCSC website. The NCSC website has huge numbers of really useful design patterns. Talks about where to put your different bits and bobs, if I can use that expression, on your network, where you put the security and where you don't. More importantly, where you don't need to put the security, because you don't put security everywhere, you put it in very, very specific places. That's the trick to doing it cheaply.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it costs you a fortune, and nobody manages to do it.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is, right at the heart of most IT security are three concepts: confidentiality, integrity, and availability.
Yeah.
Now, historically, present company accepted, and in terms of this presentation, historically, most IT people have talked about confidentiality.
Yeah.
It used to be if you went to an IT security conference, everyone was talking about access control.
Yeah.
That was all they talked about, okay? And they did that for decades. I know, because 30 years ago, I used to work in that world, and that's all we ever talked about.
Yeah.
What do we care about? What do digital preservationists care about? They care about integrity, and they care about availability, access.
Yeah.
Those are the only two things we care about. There is an absolute alignment between the fundamental concepts that sit underneath IT security and the fundamental concepts that sit underneath digital preservation. They're almost the same discipline. We just use different words. So.
No, that's great. Thank you. Thanks very much. Oh, there's one more at the back there.
Yep, I'll just
John, just keep you on your toes. Yeah, it is, you know, regardless of what your role is, there's a combination of things that you can do. Obviously, the vault concept that we talk about is you know, you can apply that to all sorts of different areas, and that digital preservation is, you know, as to your point, is no different. We talk about the 3 I's, by the way: isolation, immutability, and intelligence. So that's the new 3 I's.
That's the new world.
That's the new ones. Yeah, no, that's good. That's good.
2 questions. One is critical data, right? How do you look at critical data? I'm just curious, do you measure that as a % of overall data, or do you measure that absolute, and how does it grow, right? Because if it grows at the overall data growth, right, you may face challenges, 1.
Yeah.
And 2 is, when you say it's, the data is secured in an unchangeable state, right?
Yeah.
How do you practically do that? Do you look to certain storage media technologies? Do you look to certain approaches that you assure, right? Typically, if you have any software that assures it's unchangeable, that may get attacked as well, right? So how do you make the data really immutable, right, that you have stored that critical data?
Okay, so we'll start with that one. So the appliances that we store data on are what's called, well, they're immutable. So we are built with proprietary protocols. The protocols have been around since the 80s, late 80s. Data is checked for integrity, and it has a self-healing architecture. So when it goes in, it is not possible for it to... I guess the simple way to put it is there's no oxygen and there's no air supply getting to the data when it's in that position. So there's no way that anything can change, malicious or otherwise, without somebody accessing it and restoring it. So it's kind of a, you know, it's a disk array without spinning disk. So that's where we get the immutability from. In terms of the critical workloads and how much do they grow, I'm working with a number of organisations who are trying to figure out what that means. And I'll pick on the finance sector because it's quite an easy one to kind of, you know, to lean on. So banks have a banking license. I mentioned the analogy before. They have a banking license. If you're unable to access the system that allows you to, you know, to see how much, what's my balance, how much money do I have? If I can't access money, then that is the critical application. So that's a critical application. What are the interdependencies? What things need to be alive to help this, you know, facilitate that that workload? And that's where you get to the point of what the critical data is. I mentioned before some of the simple examples. I'm not sure if it's on that on the NIST slide. No, it's not actually. You know, the things that you consider to be critical materials, things like Active Directories, things like DNIS, things like, you know, at a base level, how we reinstall a telephone system, how we configure our network and our switches, that's kind of the foundation. Without any of that stuff, you can't do the other things anyway. You can't bring a server, a database, a workload back. So it's working out what are the things that we absolutely need. If everything's gone, how do we start again tomorrow? And what are the base level? And then what are the things from, if you're an organisation that makes money through, I don't know, searches for data, then actually the searches for data where we make money is very important, and that's a service that we need to get up quickly. So it's kind of looking at it that way. What is the business driven on, and that's how we find businesses focusing in on what the critical workload is. Equally, we have organisations who have no idea what the critical workloads and applications are, and they just want everything in there. So, that's petabyte scale cyber recovery vaults, which is crazy, but it's looking at it in a basic, take it back to the very basic foundation steps. If everything is gone, how do we start tomorrow, and where do we make our money? And that's typically where businesses start. Mm-hmm. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and one follow-up question is
Cool.
the access to the vault critical? Meaning, does it have to be in the millisecond scale, or are there other business requirements where you say you have to have access within a certain amount of time to that critical data in order to be useful?
So, do you mean in terms of recovery?
Yes, I'm sorry, yes.
Right, okay.
Correct.
So, again, that's down to, that's for a business to define what that is. So in recent examples with customers, they have implemented a vault. They basically take a copy of the backup data, then they run the analytics to see if it is safe and clean. In the old world, if they wanted to recover that in the event of a cyber attack, then you're kind of taking a bit of a gamble and trying to restore things. Because we can see that the data is clean and you can recover from it, it goes from a process of being weeks to months to actually being hours to days. Mm-hmm. So obviously speed is key in terms of responding, because if we can't respond, we can't recover, we're dead. So it's on the business to define what does that SLA look like? What does the business require? So, yeah, again, not if that's a vague answer to the question, but it's kind of dependent on what the business wants to do. But it is typically hours to days versus weeks to month in the old world.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, cool.
So I think it's also worth augmenting the conversation. So if we look at some of the examples that Stuart gave there, we take financial services. It's probably quite easy because money is binary. But if we look at digital preservation, what are the kinds of things that you're preserving? You may be preserving images. You may be photographing artifacts and storing them. So actually what you're actually looking after is file. And file is the predominantly most likely type of media to be attacked by cyber. Yeah? That's where we see people coming in. Now, if we look at the marketplace today, around about 80% of the world's data is unstructured. By that, we mean file. So being able to look after and remediate from such an attack. So one of the questions you had there is, when is the vault open? So we have customers that set very defined parameters. For example, access to the vault might be 20 minutes, 1 hour per day, and it's not the IT admins that are allowed to access it, it's a CISO type role. We talk about unstructured. Unstructured data tends to be large scale. Most of us probably have a laptop at home where we've been collecting all the digital photographs that we have, and I have to pay more money to Apple because the scale of data that we're looking at is larger than ever before. So some of the things that we're able to do with the tooling, and absolutely the systems that we're building conform to the criteria that people like this, else people wouldn't want to spend time with us. Why would I buy something that's not immutable from a company like Dell? And by the way, there are other companies as well, so it's not the only thing. But we can recover petabyte scale vault in about 2 hours. So you start to think back to the example with the HSE and the human cost of recovering things.
Yeah.
As a technology provider, we're just there as part of the insurance policy, or your example where the insurance policy won't pay out because it's a state act, which effectively is war. And that is what we're really dealing with. So it has to conform to the standards and the patterns that we see coming out of security organizations. And all we're doing is trying to build technology that fits into those standards and patterns. But come and talk to us. We've got some great examples. If we look at people like police forces.
Yeah.
First of all, they digitize evidence whether it's taking it from your laptop or your phone or whatever, call recordings, they can't delete it. But they need to be able to ensure that that data isn't changed. So firstly, we want to make sure that we preserve the data, but we also want to be able to preserve it and protect it from cyber. So these are the challenges that we're seeing, and this is why it's a really exciting conversation to have with the digital preservation community, because it's about bringing together the three cohorts of the subject matter expert, IT, and the cyber resilience people. And the vendor, well, we play our part in that. That's really it. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, Rob. Thank you, guys. I think that was the end of the questions. So we're good. I don't know if you want to wrap up. Tom, you want me to do it then? Need the microphone? You can use this one.
Well, just
Yeah.
thank you very much.
No, thank you.
Everybody,
Thanks for your time.